Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's event. A very warm welcome to everybody who has joined us today. Please do introduce yourself in the chat box. Perhaps you could let us know a little about who you are and your organisation in the chat whilst we wait for everybody to join us. I can see the numbers still going up, which is fantastic. And I will just wait a minute before I introduce myself properly. You've got a few moments, if you need to grab a glass of water before we start properly. And make yourself comfortable before we begin. You can still see those numbers going up, which is fantastic. Brilliant to see you all today. I hope everybody's getting into the festive spirit. This is where I usually talk about the weather, but it's not very nice, so I'm not going to do that today. Brilliant. Do keep introducing yourself in the chat. Fantastic to see lots of different organisations and roles here. Brilliant. Okay. People are still joining us, but I think we're probably just about ready to get started as we've got lots to get through today. So my name is Amy. I am Small Charity Support Manager at NCVO. My pronouns are she, her. I'm a white woman. I've got brown hair in a ponytail. Today I'm wearing glasses and I've got a stripy t-shirt on because it's quite warm in my house right now. It's absolutely amazing to have so many of you join us today. We're very proud to be working in partnership today with Salford University, the Here Equality and Inclusion Network, Cards for Bravery, and the Alzheimer's Society. So I'm part of our practical support team here at NCVO, and a big part of my job is working on the Small Charity Help Desk, answering all sorts of inquiries from small voluntary organisations on anything about running a charity. And questions around volunteering are very frequent. There's a real appetite from inquirers to make sure they're creating inclusive and accessible remote volunteering opportunities, hence why we're here today. So if I could have the next slide, please, Eleanor. So just a little bit of housekeeping from me to run through before we kick things off. So there will not be a break during today's session, but if you need to step away from your screen at any point, please feel free to do so. And I do hope you've got a coffee or a drink in hand. You'll notice that closed captions or subtitles have been enabled. So to turn these on or off, you can click on the CC icon in the toolbar at the bottom of your screen, and you can also adjust the size of them. Your microphones have been automatically muted to prevent any background noise, as there are a lot of us here today, and your cameras are off. Today's event is being recorded, so by being here, you are consenting to being recorded. And we will circulate a copy of the recording and the slides by email next week. And my colleague Lorena is also going to add a PDF version of the slides in the chat now, in case you like to download those and be able to zoom in and out of those slides. I'm not expecting any fire alarms where I am. There might be some barking dogs, but I'll try and keep them quiet. But do listen out wherever you are and respond accordingly. And just a reminder that this is a safe space. I'd like us to respect one another in the chat and when you ask questions in the Q&A. So please use the chat to add any comments or reflections around anything you hear today. But I would ask that you please use the Q&A function for any questions. And you can also upvote any questions that you see somebody else ask that you think you'd also like to know the answer to. And we've got plenty of time at the end for the Q&A. So you should see the Q&A function at the bottom of your toolbar at the bottom of the screen. Next slide, please. So just very briefly before we start, for anyone who is unfamiliar with us, NCVO is the largest network for charities and volunteering. We're very proud to represent and support over 17,000 voluntary organisations of all sizes, from the very biggest household names to the smallest community groups. And our members range from big medical research charities to local amateur sports clubs. But at their heart, they've all got the aim of making the world a better place. And we'd love for you to join us. Next slide, please. So if you're not already a member, by joining NCVO, you can save time and money. So as a member, you get access to information and guidance, downloadable tools and templates, discounted training with a 30% discount, access to research and our trusted suppliers, and much more. But only members can access everything we have to offer. You don't have to be a registered charity to join, and membership is free for organisations with an annual income of less than £30,000. And if you're interested in joining a member, you can find out more on our website. And my colleague Lorena might be able to put a link in the chat there of where to join us. Next slide, please. So looking at our agenda for today, you'll be pleased to know that soon I'll be handing over to our first speakers from Salford University and the Here Equality and Inclusion Network, before hearing from Cards for Bravery and the Alzheimer's Society. And then we've got plenty of time for questions and answers. So before we get started with our agenda for the morning, it would be great to understand a little more about who we've got in the room with us today. So my colleague Lorena is going to launch a quick poll now that has 2 questions. Fantastic. So the first question is around the role of volunteers in your organisation. And the second question is why you're here today. So that should have popped up on your screen. There are 2 questions, so you need to scroll down to get to the second one. And then we'll share some of those results on our screen in a second. Okay, fantastic. I think most people have participated now. If we could end the poll, Lorena, and just share some of those results on the screen. Fantastic. So we can see the, kind of a equal mix between those who have more paid staff than volunteers and those who have more volunteers than staff. But that's kind of 80% of who's here today. And in terms of why people are joining us today, people are saying that they offer remote volunteering roles already, but want to improve inclusion and accessibility, which is fantastic, or are in the process of creating those kind of roles as well. Fantastic. If we can stop sharing those. So just briefly, last thing from me. So we're delivering today's webinar because we know that equity, diversity and inclusion is a priority across the sector. Our Time Well Spent 2023 research into the national experience of volunteers confirmed that EDI continued to be a challenge in volunteering. For example, fewer volunteers said that their volunteering group was diverse. In 2018, 73% of volunteers said that there were people from a wide range of backgrounds and cultures in their group. In 2022, this had dropped to 66%. We also know that remote volunteering is here to stay. Volunteering online or over the phone is ranked as the 3rd most common place to volunteer. So how can we harness the opportunity that remote volunteering presents? whilst prioritising accessibility and inclusion. So over the next an hour and a half, we'll hear from some excellent expert speakers, and the webinar will finish, as I mentioned, with a Q&A, and we'll also share some resources and ask for some feedback from you. So that's everything from me. So it's my great pleasure to hand over to our first speakers on the next slide, please.
Thank you very much, Amy. And thank you very much for all attendees for finding time in your very busy schedules to join us today. My name is Daiga Kamerade. I'm a professor in work and well-being at the University of Salford. My pronouns are her, she, her. I'm a white Latvian woman, medium dark hair in a ponytail and rimless glasses and wearing a dark formal jacket. Today I will be presenting together with my project partner, Dr. Christina Goodall from Hair Equality and Inclusion Network. We will present our findings from our recently finished digital project that looked at how digital inclusion affects disabled adults' voluntary work. As part of the project, we analyzed large survey data with 30,000 participants from all over the UK, and this survey included 1/3 of disabled adults, and we interviewed 18 disabled volunteers. NCVO was our project partner and generously allowed to use their time well spent survey data as well. We will highlight the main findings that might be practically useful when thinking about more digitally inclusive volunteering for disabled adults. I will now pass to Christina Goodall to introduce what we have learned about disabled adults' attitudes towards volunteering, online volunteering.
Thank you, Daiga. Hi, everyone. Yes, as Daiga said, I'm Christine Goodall and I coordinate the HERE network, and we are very pleased to be one of the partners with Salford University in this project. And our role, a lot of our role was about advising on the sort of inclusion side and things to do with disability, recruiting people with lived experience who are very, very, very much important part of the project. So I suppose to say that at the beginning of what we found out about people's attitudes was that the research was very much based on speaking to disabled people with actual experience of volunteering, either current or previous. So this is where the findings are coming from. So as you might imagine, a lot of disabled people are very, very interested in remote volunteering. You can see on the slide a quote from one of the participants, who was someone that whose particular impairment was connected with chronic fatigue, and so for them it was very important to be able to have that capacity, not to have to get ready to travel, and all of those things that might be entailed in having to go to another location in order to volunteer. And that reason for remote volunteering is very important for many disabled people with a lot of different impairments, or there might be other reasons as well as a disability that mean that it is particularly convenient for them to volunteer remotely, because we know that a lot of disabled people are also have other caring responsibilities. They may also have childcare or other caring responsibilities, which additionally mean that it's more convenient for them to volunteer remotely. But it's obviously not a solution for all disabled people, so we should be careful not to make that assumption. It largely depends on people's motives for volunteering as well. If a primary motive for volunteering is being able to be out mixing with people face to face to combat perhaps loneliness and isolation, and so on, then obviously a completely remote role would not suit that person. And also there are barriers connected to what our research was about digital inclusion. Now, obviously there is but increased digital with the phone. There might be apps and things that so therefore that might be a problem. So that might be a fear that people have, and that's particularly why our research was important, is about how to combat those barriers, whether real or what people might worry about, but the digital side of being able to volunteer remotely. And I've just realized before I hand back to Daiga, and the next slide, please, I omitted to do my little description, so I'll do it now. So I'm an older white woman. I have got very, very long hair, but today it's tied up, so you can't see it. But and I'm wearing a grey jumper with buttons on the front, and I'm also using headphones because I'm severely visually impaired myself, and I'm using a screen reader today to participate in the webinar. Thank you. So I'll hand back to Daiga now.
Yeah. Previous slide, please. Thank you very much. So when we spoke to disabled volunteers, what kind of barriers they identified to digital inclusion in volunteering? The most surprising findings that came out of our research was that usually it's assumed that volunteering leads to employment. When it comes to digital inclusion in volunteering, what came out of our interviews was actually that for disabled adults, it's employment that often helps to be digitally included in volunteering. Several of our interviewees said that they used help from the government's access to work scheme to buy the right equipment for them to get a job and to be able to work in a job. And then they can use this equipment to volunteer, for example, online, or access offline volunteering if it requires using, for example, registering on websites, etc. So what we can learn from that is that this emphasizes a need for voluntary sector organizations that want to include disabled people in volunteering to join forces with others advocating for changing the access to work scheme so it applies to voluntary work as well, not just to paid work, and generally advocating for universal access to digital support for disabled adults in all spheres of life, not only in voluntary work. Other things that came out of interviews was that disabled volunteers often emphasize that they are double disadvantaged when it comes to volunteering. On one hand, they often tend to come from groups of society that are already less involved in volunteering. They tend to have less income, less education. They tend to be older. But additional disadvantage comes from being disabled. For example, they spoke how they might not have money to buy the right equipment, like accessible smartphone, or they might have finished their education many years ago when Zoom was not even invented. For example, we had a disabled volunteer in 60s who was volunteering for 3 organizations, and he spoke about high levels of frustration when all these 3 organizations moved to Zoom meetings. And he had never used the Zoom before. There was no support for that. And he said these new technologies are created by somebody with university degree for people with university degree. And they often not accessible for somebody like him who had finished his education many decades ago and didn't go past GCSEs. So he was very happy to continue to volunteer, but he was struggling with new technology. Then a third barrier that was identified was lack of digital access and skills. It might be surprising to hear that we might have an impression that everybody has an internet at home, everybody has a smartphone, but when we looked at survey data, that at least 1 million of disabled adults in the UK do not have an internet connection at home. At least 1.4 million of them do not use internet for emails or any other everyday tasks that we take for granted, and 2 million of disabled adults do not have a computer or smartphone. So not everybody is connected. And related to that, disabled adults expressed frustration that there is assumptions that everybody uses the internet, everybody knows how to use an email or fill in form online, but that this is not the case. We shouldn't be assuming that. And finally, the biggest barrier was lack of personalized and ongoing support. Personalized support is very important because impairments can be complex. Now, there's no one-off-the-shelf solution when it comes to disability and impairment. On average, a disabled adult can have two different impairments, for example, hearing problems, and mental health issues. And it's not enough to ask at the beginning, what support do you need? Because as you see in this quote, sometimes we might not know what support is needed till we start volunteering role and task. So it's very important to check in regularly with volunteers, not just disabled volunteers, to establish whether some new needs have been identified. Next slide, please. So based on our results, we developed guidelines for digital inclusion of disabled people. We will put the link to these guidelines in the chat. I will just summarize them here. So these guidelines are based on our results and best practice examples. The key principles are that one simple step is better than none and can make a huge difference. For example, providing all documents related to volunteering so that they can a screen reader can read them, can be a major change in accessibility. It's better to do one action than no action at all. Then it's important to ask all volunteers what their accessibility needs might be, because many disabilities are invisible and many people are too shy to ask. And our disabled interviewees emphasized it's difficult to always be the one who asks for additional support. Then these guidelines can be adopted to where your organization is and the stage of volunteer journey. For example, if your organization is starting from scratch, you might start with asking all volunteers what their support needs are and going from there. If you're already doing something, you might do some accessibility audit of your website, for example, or online tools you're using, or adding captions to the videos. As I say, small steps are better than no steps. Person-centered approach, as I mentioned, is very important. It's important to have one-on-one discussions or surveys to identify specific barriers that volunteers could face and co-design tailored solutions with them. And finally, it's important to remember, and that was a sort of surprise that came out in interviews, is that digital inclusion solutions are not always digital. For example, we had an interviewee who said, actually, what I need is a very comfortable chair that lets me to sit at the front of computer for a long time. I don't need digital solution. I need a comfortable enough chair. Next slide, please. Here we have summarized our guidelines. It's actually a much thicker document. There's just guidelines outlining journeys of how volunteer goes through an organization, starting from preparing for recruitment, onboarding, development and training, and retention and exit, and what could be done at each stage of this volunteering journey. We hope that these guidelines provide valuable ideas for creating inclusive spaces that empower disabled people to thrive in volunteering. And additionally, we will host 2 practical workshops related to digital guidelines early in June to support the adoption of these guidelines. I'm now pleased to pass to the next speaker from Hearts for Bravery.
Hi everyone. First of all, thank you so much for the previous talk. That was really insightful. I just want to start by saying thank you to the NCVO for hosting this wonderful webinar and giving us the space to share our personal insights on remote volunteering and how it has impacted our small charity. My name is Katie. My pronouns are she, her, and I am the founder and chair of Cards for Bravery. I live with chronic illness and a disability myself. I am a young white woman with blonde and pink shoulder length hair. I am wearing glasses, and today I am wearing a navy blue jumper. I will also let Chelsea introduce herself, who will be sharing her experience with remote volunteering today.
Hi everyone, I'm Chelsea. My pronouns are she, they, and I also live with a disability myself. I'm a young Chinese woman with brown hair, glasses, and I'm wearing a sweater vest on top of a long sleeve shirt. I'm a trustee for Cards for Bravery and the Projects and Resources Coordinator. I've been volunteering for Cards for Bravery for just under 4 years now, and I'll be talking about my experience volunteering remotely later today.
Next slide, please. So I'd like to begin by introducing you a bit to Cards for Bravery. So to give you a bit of background, our charity Cards for Bravery is dedicated to brightening the days of hospitalised and seriously ill children and their families. So we do this by creating and distributing positive handmade cards, bravery packages, activity packs, and sort of other resources to help bring comfort and encouragement to young patients. And I founded this charity myself when I was 13 years old and during a 4-month-long hospital stay. So I'd received a handmade card from my best friend, which really brightened my day. And I started making some handmade cards for some of the other children who were on the ward with me. And after realizing sort of the impact that such a small and thoughtful gift could have, I realized then that I wanted to do something to help other children in similar situations as myself. And today we'll be sharing sort of how Cards for Bravery has transformed through remote volunteering and how other small charities can benefit from this approach as well. Next slide, please. So a bit about sort of how we involve remote volunteers at Cards for Bravery. So at Cards for Bravery, our volunteers play an essential role in everything we do, as we're a completely volunteer-run charity. So from the very beginning, obviously living with a disability and chronic illness myself, one of our sort of key values have been trying to make volunteering as accessible as possible. So about 80% of our main volunteer team have lived experience with hospitalisation, either personally or through a family member, and about 60% live with a mental or physical disability themselves. So sort of creating remote and accessible volunteering roles has allowed us to honour these volunteering needs and ensure that they can make an impact in ways that work best for them. It has allowed us to open up new ways for people to contribute, sort of no matter where they're located or their situation. And for us, our remote volunteers help us in a number of ways. So we have many card making volunteers who sort of help us create and send our handmade cards. So with this, you know, they can put their creativity to work sort of through designing messages, different designs and handwritten cards. And many of these volunteers contribute from all different parts of the world, the majority in the UK. However, you know, we've also had volunteers who have sent us cards in from the United States, Australia, even Japan. So a very sort of wide range of people, but this really helps bring a diversity of styles that sort of makes each card unique. And beyond making cards, our remote volunteers also help us with essential tasks that help keep the charity running. So things such as administrative roles or social media work. And this help has been invaluable, especially as a small charity where we don't have a sort of large in-house team. Next slide, please. So does remote volunteering always need to involve digital technology? So while digital tools are helpful, we found that not every aspect of remote volunteering needs to be done on a computer or on a smartphone or other type of sort of digital laptop. So many of the activities we do, so for example, like creating our handmade cards, they're often hands-on and they don't require a digital component. And we've also found other non-digital ways to involve remote volunteers beyond the card making. So for example, having volunteers helping to assemble our bravery and activity packs doesn't require any technology. So we give volunteers sort of the opportunity to be able to be given these supplies to work with from home, sort of organising the packs within their own time and then get them back to us sort of ready to go out to the children. Next slide, please. So I want a little bit about sort of accessibility and inclusion in remote volunteering and sort of how we work with that within our charity. So I think one of the most powerful aspects of remote volunteering is, how it opens doors for people who might otherwise face barriers to volunteering in person. And we found that sort of many individuals, especially those with like physical disabilities, ongoing health conditions, caregiving responsibilities, or sort of even those living in like remote areas are now able to volunteer sort of meaningfully through remote roles. So this inclusive approach means that sort of regardless of the location, their ability or schedule, people can still make a real difference. And I've seen sort of firsthand the joy that volunteers experience when they're able to help without having to worry about logistical challenges. So we've intentionally designed our volunteer opportunities to be as inclusive and accessible as possible, ensuring that everyone can feel that they can contribute to our charity in a meaningful way. So some of the ways that we make our volunteer roles more accessible and inclusive include having flexible rules and scheduling. So we understand that many of our volunteers sort of have complex lives, whether that's due to health conditions, caregiving responsibilities, educational sort of needs or other commitments. And that's why our remote roles are sort of designed to fit around their needs. So volunteers can choose when and how much time they dedicate to their tasks, which allow them to work at their own pace. So for example, we find that someone that lives with chronic fatigue might spend an hour in the afternoon creating cards when they feel well enough, whilst others might spend, a whole afternoon assembling bravery packs during their free time. But, as long as we ensure individuals are completing their tasks, we sort of leave it up to the volunteers as to when they complete these. Another thing we do is sort of using accessible communication and tools and resources. So obviously technology can sometimes be a barrier to some. So we sort of prioritize using tools that are more simple and free and widely available. So things like platforms like WhatsApp, email, like Google Drive allows us to sort of communicate effectively with our volunteers without requiring them to invest in specialized software or specialized equipment. And we also provide sort of clear instructions and templates that guide volunteers through their roles. And for volunteers who sort of do prefer or need paper-based resources, we offer printed instructions and materials by post so that they can still participate fully without relying on digital tools. Also having sort of different rule designs for different access needs. So we sort of actively create we actively create rules that are accessible to individuals with diverse needs and abilities. So for instance, crafting cards or like assembling bravery packages is not too physically intensive and can be done seated or lying down, which makes it often work well for those with mobility challenges or fatigue. Whilst also tasks like social media management or content creation sort of allows volunteers to contribute using their existing skills entirely from home. Along with that, sort of having a welcoming and supporting community. So Often those living with disabilities and chronic illness struggle with increased isolation and difficulty socializing. And this isn't just true for those living with disabilities and illness, but also potentially, for example, those who are retired or caring for others. So we try our best to sort of create opportunities for our volunteers to engage with each other and through us, sort of through regular check-ins, group calls and updates, and to a degree sort of social media as well. And this really helps everyone feel part of a larger team, even if they are working independently. And many of our volunteers have really sort of fostered strong friendships through our charity. There are many ways charities can make rules more inclusive and accessible, not just through remote rules, but physical too. But these are just some of the ways we as a small charity make our remote rules more accessible and inclusive for our volunteers. And it's important to note that you shouldn't wait for things to need or have to be accessible to start implementing features like these, but actually implementing them from the get-go tends to sort of be an advantage for everyone, not just those in need of additional support. Next slide, please. So sort of making remote volunteering viable for small charities. So for small charities, remote volunteering can be a game changer. It tends to be much more sort of cost effective, and it provides the flexibility to sort of work with a diverse group of people. So we've been able to sort of grow our team and really tap into different skills without the need for a physical office or, full-time staff. So in terms of coordination, as I said before, we sort of keep costs low by using either free or sort of low cost tools. For instance, things like Google Workspace is actually, free for smaller charities, and that sort of helps us share documents and files easily. WhatsApp allows sort of quick communication with team members, and a large majority of people now sort of use WhatsApp, and same with social media platforms, or also, as I said before, sort of through printed resources as well. We also make it a point to sort of communicate clearly with our volunteers, sort of setting expectations and providing regular updates. So this helps everyone stay connected and informed, even if they're miles away. So regular meetings and online resources have become vital in sort of keeping everyone on the same page. Next slide, please. So the impact of remote volunteering on Cards to Bravery. So remote volunteering has made an incredible difference to our charity. It has allowed us to expand our reach far beyond our local area and build a team of volunteers all across the UK and even globally. And this means that even without a large physical presence, we've been able to grow, have a wider impact, and offer a range of services that wouldn't have otherwise been possible. I'm now going to hand over to Chelsea so she can sort of share her experience as a remote volunteer living with a chronic illness for our charity. And that will be on the next slide, please.
Hi again. So I'm Chelsea, and I'm going to be talking about my experience with remote volunteering. I originally applied to be the admin volunteer for Cards of Bravery, where I did that for about 2 years before changing to my current role. In my previous role, I was the one that was responsible for all of our card making volunteers that Katie mentioned that are all over the world. But now I overlook and manage projects, create promotional work and graphics, manage our website, and much more, many of which is digital. I applied to volunteer during the COVID-19 pandemic while studying at university because I wanted to gain further skills, and I wanted to volunteer somewhere that aligned with my goals, but there were very limited opportunities available to me. And one of those reasons is because I live with lupus, an autoimmune condition which impacts me every day, and I can only do so many things. And a lot of places discouraged me because I didn't know how accessible they were, whether they could understand the unreliability of my condition on my body, and whether or not the organization could accommodate to that. So finding Cards of Bravery was incredible because they not only understood all of that, but knew the realities of what it is like to grow up with a dynamic disability where my condition fluctuates. My younger brother did actually also give me a card when I was first diagnosed at 14 years old. And so I understand that kind of small support from something, such a small gesture, which could mean so much at that stage in my life. Having the option to volunteer remotely with Cards of Bravery meant I could contribute to an organization with the skills I had without compromising my own health. I could work when my body allowed me to, and still provide the same output the organization wanted from me when I was able to, rather than when someone was telling me to. Sometimes I feel like organizations might feel like they don't really know how to take on someone when there is this unreliability that comes with disability. But under the right circumstances, accommodations made can really help reach their full potential. Remote working also decreases stress because I know I can still get my work completed without the pressure of doing it within the usual 9 to 5 window and could work with my body rather than against it. I don't have to worry about things like early mornings, which I really struggle with, transport to an office, or concerns about whether or not I can go home and whether my body will allow me to do that. Remote working for Cause for Bravery also meant that I was able to realize that I was able to work remotely as well, not just volunteer, which is why since graduating university, I now work for 2 charities, Lupus UK and Rare Disease Research Network, alongside volunteering for Cause for Bravery. And because of the flexibility of remote working, it gives me time to rest outside of work and volunteering when I need to, and like still complete all of the jobs that I need to do. Many jobs can be done from home now, and the option to volunteer remotely opened more doors as I could find opportunities all over the UK before landing with Cars for Bravery. And that was really difficult for me because I live up in Scotland and I'm the furthest volunteer from Katie and Cars for Bravery's base. I found more places that supported flexible remote working, which also gave me a sense of community with the rare disease space, which is not something that I had growing up. And that really like helped with isolation as well, growing up with chronic illness.
Yes, thank you so much to Chelsea for sort of sharing your experience remote volunteering for Cards Bravery. And many of our sort of remote volunteers like Chelsea have sort of become an incredible asset to the team and sort of worked with us for many years now. So as you can sort of see from Chelsea's experience, remote volunteering not only has an impact on the charity, but also can have sort of a huge impact on the individual volunteering themselves. So a bit about who we have found is sort of interested in remote volunteering and why. So we've actually really seen a broad range of people who are interested in remote volunteering with Cards Bravery. As we have touched on, sort of a large portion of our team consists of individuals with physical or mental disabilities. But we also sort of work with students who are at potentially university or college who are looking for more flexibility, sort of professionals who are trying to balance work and volunteering, and also sort of retired people and caregivers who want to help sort of while staying closer to home. So it can be sort of beneficial to everyone, not only those with extra access needs. Next slide, please. So a little bit about sort of where should small charities begin with remote volunteering. So for small charities looking to get started with remote volunteering, I'd recommend sort of beginning with roles that can easily be done remotely. So maybe things like administrative tasks, design or social media works or communication works, as these kinds of roles sort of require minimal physical resources and can often be completed with just a computer or even a smartphone. So starting with these type of tasks sort of allow charities to explore remote volunteering in a more manageable and low risk way. Also as well, developing sort of a straightforward onboarding process, sort of clear instructions, templates and resources that will help remote volunteers get started without feeling overwhelmed. Also, it can be more difficult to sort of maybe do onboarding processes online or remotely rather than in person. So these could include things like maybe sort of step-by-step guides or video tutorials, and also making sure that volunteers sort of have someone that they can keep in touch with easily and sort of contact if they have any questions at any point. Also as well, like we said before, sort of using accessible tools is another great starting point. Many which are sort of free or low cost. So maybe things like WhatsApp, email, things like Google Drive is beneficial for sharing files or sort of communicating via post as well. And finally, it's sort of crucial to be open to feedback as well. So the experience of remote volunteers can really offer invaluable insights, and that can improve processes and make the volunteer experience even better. But, you know, listening to that feedback will mean that you'll be able to grow the support you're providing with remote volunteers and really listening to what is going well and what might not be. But sort of starting with sort of simple and clearly defined rules of other small charities can take the first steps towards integrating remote volunteers to their team. Next slide, please. But yes, to wrap up, I think remote volunteering has an immense potential to benefit both small charities and the volunteers themselves. It tends to bring accessibility, it really engages a diverse group of supporters and amplifies the impact that us at charities were able to make, even if we have sort of limited resources. So I'd really like to sort of encourage other charities to explore the possibilities of remote volunteering and be open to sort of creative ways to engage people beyond physical boundaries. So by embracing these remote roles, we can really make volunteering more inclusive and impactful. But yes, thank you again to the NCVO for this opportunity, and thank you all for being here today. And we would now like to hand over to Heather and Ruth from the Alzheimer's Society.
Thank you, Katie. That was inspiring as the previous speaker. Such a wonderful charity and a great idea. I've already been on your website and had a look at what we can do. I'm Heather Davies. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm from Alzheimer's Society. I'm a white woman with chin-length mid-brown hair that frames my face. I wear glasses, and today I'm dressed in a shirt and a jumper to keep myself warm. I'm here with my colleague Ruth, who I'll hand over to introduce herself, and together we'll be supporting each other to give you a snapshot of the services offered by Alzheimer's Society that are volunteer supported. We'll also share with you how remote volunteers are supported and highlight their benefits to us as an organisation. So I'll pass you over to Ruth to say hi.
Hi, I'm Ruth Woodfield. I'm a volunteering specialist for the Alzheimer's Society. My pronouns are she, her. I have shoulder length blonde hair. I'm a white woman. I don't wear glasses. And today I'm wearing a navy zip up top with our logo and branding of our Forget Me Not flower. And I'll pass back to Heather to start. Thank you.
Thank you, Ruth. Next slide, please. So I am the volunteer enabled services manager and work within what we call our universal services for Alzheimer's Society. And this is a snapshot of the services that are offered throughout. So we start with our dementia support line, and that's our core where people call into us, and they're the kind of the island that passes through to all the other services that come through. So there's the dementia support line, which is telephone, email and social media led. And they can pass through to what we have is the lasting power of attorney team, a continuing healthcare appeal support team, dementia support forum, which is our online forum, and then we have companion calls. So the services team cover England, Wales and Northern Ireland. Next slide, please. So the dementia support line is a hub team, and they're based across the 3 locations, which we have a hub in Belfast, Birmingham and Warrington, Manchester. And that is for people with dementia, their carers and relatives and others close to them, or anyone who is concerned about dementia, including professionals working within the field of dementia care. The dementia support line is currently staffed by a team of dedicated paid dementia advisors. And as part of our future planning, we are exploring the possibility of involving volunteers in this service. This approach could expand our reach and flexibility for the support line, allow us to better meet the growth and needs of people affected by dementia while complementing our paid for expertise. So today we're here to learn a lot more about that from our colleagues that we've joined with NCVO. Next slide, please. So from the dementia support line, if somebody comes through to the line and asks for support with lasting power of attorney, we do offer support for that, and they'll come through to the lasting power of attorney team. That consists of paid for support and supported by a team of trained volunteers who support service users in England only. The volunteers that work here work closely with the role managers and the coordinators, maintaining regular contact during every session that they come to. So when a volunteer logs in, they are actively linked with a role manager or a member of that team to support them through the day or the session that they're working with. They will have access to Microsoft Teams for efficient communication, document sharing and active team chats, enabling them to stay connected and effectively contribute throughout their volunteer session. This does have to be digital because we work alongside with the Office of the Public Guardian, and it is a digital-based site working with the government team from there. Next slide, please. So our National Health Continuing Healthcare Appeal, that provides care for people who are going through the complex situations of getting funding package, care package towards somebody living with or affected by dementia. And we have a team of paid for staff again, but this service is run by trained volunteers who have lived experience or are in a profession where they can support. And again, it supports service users in England. So the volunteers are supported, they have the same facilities, but they have to be quite digitally aware, skill set, because it's just full of documentation. So there's lots of documents coming through, we have to read, we have to go through. These volunteers are very different to lasting power of attorney volunteers, because we can't sort of say to the volunteer, you need to work X amount of hours. It has to be a really flexible role, so they could be supporting somebody for 10 hours 1 week and then not hear anything again for 5 months until those appeals have come through, and then pick back up. So it's a really dedicated role, which really has to be managed timeline through. Next slide, please. So then we go to the Dementia Forum. So it is, as it says, it's a place to ask questions, share experiences and get information and practical tips about living with dementia. The community is free to use. It's available 24 hours a day and it's accessed via a smartphone, tablet or computer. People on there remain anonymous. It is peer-to-peer support. We have volunteers that moderate within the forum. It's a really flexible role because it is 24/7. So our moderators can go on there. They look at giving us about 7 hours a week, but that can be in the middle of the night, early in the morning, mid-afternoon, whenever is suitable for them to go on, or they can dip in and dip out. So they can work around everything else that is going on around of their daily life. The priority is ensuring that the forum rules are upheld, and it might mean that having to remove inappropriate posts, for example. However, the main focus is in providing support to the members. There's always support and advice available from volunteers and from staff members for that. So it's a really good flexible role from there. Next slide, please. We have companion calls. So this is a telephone-led based role. So our companions are delivered entirely by volunteers, supported by a team of role managers who oversee a really large group. We have over 600 volunteers that support the companion call service. We connect with the volunteers who make the companion calls every 12 weeks through individual group catch-ups to provide guidance and support. Volunteers will log their calls into a system called Salesforce, which tracks activity and flags any additional support needs. On average, around 600 volunteers contribute to this vital service, with 15% of these volunteers do come from our corporate partners, highlighting the strong relationship that we have with businesses that are committed to the social impact. So this is a quote on there from one of our volunteers. As a companion call officer, you will be matched with someone affected by dementia and will phone them regularly to chat about anything that interests them. By dedicating a little time each week, you'll make a big impact, providing laughter, creating meaningful connections and helping people not be alone. Although an understanding of dementia is beneficial, you will not be providing information or advice, so no prior knowledge is necessary. So this is one of our lighter touch volunteer roles, and people get real big satisfaction by just having general chit chat, making that companionship. It really does make an impact to somebody who is suffering from isolation and loneliness, to have that friendly voice at the other end of the phone. Next slide, please. So we cover nationally, which helps us. So remote volunteer, having it nationally allows us to reach a wider range of people, bringing in diverse skills, cultures and languages, which is important. This provides more personalised support to the community's individuals who might otherwise not seek advice from us or support, and many deserved communities come through to us for the light touch. So by involving volunteers from different areas, we can improve our quality of services and create stronger connections with a variety of communities. It also fosters a sense of global teamwork for our volunteers, where everyone benefits from shared experiences and different perspectives. Next slide, please. So I'll pass over to my colleague Ruth. So that was a snapshot of the services that we offer, and Ruth will go through with you how we support our volunteers. Over to you, Ruth.
Thank you, Heather. So with all our volunteer roles at the Alzheimer's Society, we offer a range of resources to support them, and especially with our remote volunteering, everybody has a dedicated role manager, so that is somebody that will support them throughout their volunteering journey with us. And they also have access to a 12-weekly formal support and supervision where they can talk about their role, they can look into any extra support needs that they need, but they also do have support outside of that. So they have contact with their dedicated role manager who they can text or ring and speak to if there's any problems at any time. But that's a really important 12-weekly support where that dedicated time is put aside for them. We also have really well-trained volunteer managers. So we have a volunteer manager learning pathway where different aspects of our volunteer journey are explored, and we talk about best practice, and there's support all along the way for volunteer managers, and that is always growing and always evolving to make sure that we really are giving the best support that we can. We also introduced a couple of years ago a volunteer manager community of practice, and this is based on teams where volunteer managers are all on a dedicated teams page, but they can come together and ask for support, ask questions, and support each other in terms of what they need to access perhaps for their volunteers, if there's a situation or a problem that's come up and they want to see if anyone's experienced that before. They can talk and share between each other, and that has proved very popular and continues to grow every day with people joining. We also ensure that we offer flexible roles. So as Heather said, there may be for some things where we'll need minimum commitment, but we do try and be flexible to people's needs, as we understand that, you know, one size doesn't fit all. And we ensure that we offer all our volunteers regular refresher training. So there will be mandatory training for the majority of roles that we have, but we will ensure we do refresher training, especially with things like data protection, to ensure that our volunteers feel confident in what is being asked of them and what they need to do within their role. Next slide, please. So on top of that, we also offer some additional support for our volunteers. They have access to a wellbeing helpline, which is through one of our providers, Bupa, that staff actually have access through. So if they are finding that they need extra support, or as we know, lots of things go on in people's lives, they can actually access that support line, and it offers a counselling service. So it doesn't have to be about their particular volunteer role. It could just be something that's going on in their lives, that obviously having that support will help them in their role and hopefully help them be able to carry it out as best as they can. We have informal and formal recognition. So we have a range of e-cards for volunteers that role managers can send. We also have more formal Our People Awards, where volunteers can be nominated for living our values. And we actually have one coming up very soon, actually, for the results and the winners. And volunteers you know, it's obviously not everybody's cup of tea, but most of our volunteers love that. And even just to be nominated and recognised, even if they don't win, many just find that really rewarding. We also have a dedicated volunteer portal where volunteers can access our policies and updates. So whilst we do ensure everybody gets sent out any updated policies, if somebody deletes the email or just wants to go in and check something or access their e-learning, it's all on that volunteer portal. But we also do offer our alternatives to our e-learning, so there is workbooks and there is videos as well, so we try and be as flexible to meet the needs of people and how they learn best. We also have Monday briefings with our chief exec or some of our senior management and leadership, where volunteers are invited to join, and that's really a great way to hear about what is going on at the moment, what are the key topics we're working on, how is our strategy going, and they can be involved in those. And we also have a volunteer wellbeing support resources, and that's particularly for our volunteer managers, where they can get different resources on how best to support their volunteers. Next slide. We also do regular written communication. So we have monthly volunteer bulletins that go out to our volunteers that will talk to them about key things that are going on at the society. We'll have thank yous for different things that volunteers have done. We have spotlights on our volunteers. And we also have a monthly one for our volunteer managers, so they know exactly what their volunteers are hearing about, and they know if there's anything coming up that they need to talk to their volunteers. So if we have any refresher training or any opportunities for development, they can speak directly to their volunteers. Next. We also do a 2-yearly volunteer engagement survey. So this is really where we ask our volunteers to let us know what we're doing well, but also let us know what we're doing better. And this year we had the highest response rate that we've ever had at 26%. And we saw a definite improvement in the results for that and for the questions asked. And it's very important that we ask our volunteers these questions, but also that we then take action on them. So at the moment, action plans are being put together on where we can make improvements and where we can really address where volunteers think we could do better or we could involve them better. Next slide. And then I think this is the final one. We every year look at our volunteer impact. It's really important for us as a society and for our volunteer managers, but also our volunteers, to see what impact that their time is having on people living with dementia. They want to see that, you know, they're giving up a lot of their time and energy to really support our charity, and we want them to know the impact that's had. So just a couple of very quick numbers for you. So in 2023-24, we had 52,396 new dementia friends created. One especially for Heather's Universal Services. In that year for companion calls, there was 27,359 calls made. So that's a huge amount of support being given to people affected by dementia and keeping them feeling connected to the wider society and community. And as you can see, there's a huge amount of money has been raised as well in fundraising, and over 2,344 volunteers supported our local services, so supporting people directly affected by dementia. Next slide, please. Thank you. So that's me finished. Thank you very much. I will hand back to Amy. I think, is it Amy?
It is, yeah. Thank you very much, Ruth and Heather, and to all of our speakers today, Katie, Chelsea, Dega, and Christine. Really insightful stuff. We've got lots of time for questions, and I can see you've all been firing in questions already, and our speakers have been very proactively answering those as we go along, and we'll compile those answers to send out to you as well. If we can just stop sharing the slides, Eleanor, just so we can see everybody. I won't spotlight me. We'll see everybody. Nobody needs me on their screen. So I'm going to put a question to Ruth and Heather because it's just come in and just relevant to what you were just talking about then. There's some interest in how you organise the volunteer community of practice at the Alzheimer's Society. How many volunteer managers do you have? Do you have regular workshops and also a platform where they can share experiences and questions?
I can take that one. Yes, all of the above. So I think at last count we had over 200 volunteer managers, and very much that is what that community of practice is for, that they can talk to each other and share experiences, ask questions, ask for support and ask for advice. But we do also we've been running them pretty much on a monthly basis on workshops on maybe areas that we see are particularly coming up, or we will ask our volunteer managers the things they're interested in, and we will run those particularly on what sort of areas they want. So it's ever growing, and even though we're kind of 2 years in, I would still say it's something that, you know, we're really pushing and growing and encouraging people to join. But it really has worked very well. It is a nice one kind of stop shop for people to engage, because obviously our staff are very remote as well. Not everybody's in big teams, so you might be, you know, the only person in your team that manages volunteers. So it's a great way to ask those quick questions and build that networking and that support, peer support as well. Does that help with that one? I mean, obviously, if anyone does want to talk about the community of practice, I'm sure you'll be sharing emails. Very happy if somebody wants to drop me an email, we can put a call in and talk about it in more detail.
That's a brilliant offer. Thank you, Ruth. Another question for you there. This question, I think, it is for you around your volunteer engagement survey.
Yeah.
So the volunteer engagement survey had a 26% response rate. Why do you think that is when you've had such a hands-on approach to your recruitment and support of volunteers? And what steps are you taking to increase this engagement?
No, great question. I mean, like I said before, I think if off the top of my head, I think we were at 13% last year. It was low, and it's something that I think all charities struggle with getting people to do surveys. So certainly something that we did particularly for this one was it wasn't just sent out on an email, so all volunteers were emailed, but we're also very aware that we do have a number of volunteers that don't have email addresses. So there was that offer of speaking with one of our recruitment team where they could actually just have a phone call and go through it with them and talk about the questions, and obviously trying to make that more accessible. It's not always ideal for people to be filling in forms. They can feel quite complicated. Also, if any role managers had any volunteers that wanted, you know, to do it in person, they could do it at the end of a group, or they could do it on a one-to-one basis as well. But I think definitely, you know, 26% is not where we want to be. So we will be looking at how we can increase that in years to, you know, in the future. We'll have another one in 2 years' time. And I think it's also about talking to our volunteers and saying, you know, how do you want to receive these surveys, or how do you want to communicate best with us? And something else we've looked at is actually perhaps the amount of surveys that our volunteers may get, you know, because they may have things that come from a national point of view, but also they may have things that come locally. So we're very much trying to coordinate our, you know, communication plans across the society to make sure that we're not actually asking too much of people, that they get a bit of survey fatigue, which I think, you know, can be the case. But I think there also is some volunteers that do want to come and just do their volunteering role, and actually that's enough. That's what they want to do. They're perhaps not so interested in, you know, the wider kind of strategy or support. So I think we'll always have that group of people that don't want to do them. But yeah, definitely look at why people aren't engaging with the survey, and is actually, you know, potentially accessibility issues, etc. I think we definitely will be looking for the next one.
Thank you, Ruth. And we've just had a comment there from Dega saying 26% is sort of a standard response rate these days. Anyway, fantastic. So I'm just going to pick up on a question there from the Q&A. So I'm interested in increasing the diversity of lived experience in our team of volunteers. Can someone expand on what considerations should be included within the recruitment stage in order to expand on the pool of volunteers with lived experience. I wonder if Katie or Chelsea might have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, of course. So obviously, like we touched on, about 80% of our volunteers have lived experience to some degree of sort of hospitalization, whether that's through themselves or like friends and family members. And I'm very passionate sort of about having people with lived experience on the team, because I think it brings sort of a passion and a different perspective that others might not. I think we've really found that, obviously dependent on what type of lived experience you're looking for. So, for example, for us, it's normally those who live with chronic illness or disabilities or have experienced hospitalization. We sort of might make it sort of like clear in our recruitment stage that we're sort of keen to hear from those who have that lived experience, so sort of including that in all of like our advertisement and things like that. Also, sort of sharing the volunteer role within networks of those who might have that lived experience. So, for example, sharing it with sort of other charities or organizations who sort of work with people with disabilities or people who've experienced hospitalization, and sort of joining together to sort of for them to sort of share those roles that are available for us as well. I'm not sure, Chelsea, if you have anything else to add, because obviously I found you as well through lived experience.
I think as someone who obviously like applied for a role because of it, I think one of the things that drew me to it is because of the benefits that the job description had. So it wasn't necessarily just the part that said like, oh, we are open to hearing from these people or for you to apply, but also the benefits of, for example, the remote working aspect, being able to do what I can from the comfort of my own home and not having to like go somewhere. Like the benefits that come with the job description is almost like a subtle way of drawing the right people in, because they're the ones that would benefit most from those things. So I think that was one thing that at least drew me in. I think that would be the main thing that I would say for that.
Thanks both. Any other thoughts from anybody else on the panel around attracting lived experience volunteers? Dega, did you unmute yourself? Yeah.
Yeah. So if you're particularly struggling to attract volunteers from particular groups, for example, disabled adults, one idea might be to co-design strategies of attracting volunteers with some community groups that represent the group you're interested in. They might give you input on what could help. It's just a general idea.
Fantastic. Thank you. I'm going to pick up on the question in the chat, which I think is an excellent one. How do you all attract or advertise for volunteers in non-digital ways? So we're all quite accustomed to using various online platforms to advertise for volunteers. And previously we might have gone through volunteer centres, which are less and less available these days. So any top tips from anyone on the call about how you've reached volunteers in non-digital ways? Ruth.
Yes, I mean, volunteer centres, they were a lifeline. They were amazing. We used to get so many volunteers through those. Very much again, because obviously we are a national charity and we're so dispersed. We do a lot of advertising kind of locally, and that will usually be through our volunteer managers. That a lot of our groups will be in local community centres and out in hospitals, and we'll look at universities, and staff will go and put posters up or go and give talks. We do a lot of dementia awareness talks, and that can be through staff or volunteers, and it's always an aspect at the end that they do a bit on volunteering and what local opportunities there are. We also have Dementia Friends champions that go out and deliver dementia awareness talks, and they are based everywhere. We have so many of them, and again, they will go out and champion for us and talk on, if they're doing a particular community event or a charity, or even, in Tesco's or fundraisers, all know kind of what's available in their local area, and we'll talk about that. And we find that works really well, because that's not, me trying to sell a volunteer an opportunity. That's coming from volunteers that have been with us for years that can really talk about, you know, what it's really like to volunteer for us and what support you'll get. So we do find that actually the word of mouth, it works really well, and people saying actually you should come and volunteer for them because we feel, you know, very supported. It, you know, it can go the other way if you're not doing things right. You know, people will be quick to say don't come to us. So I think, yeah, it's a really powerful way to get people in.
Thanks, Ruth. Any other thoughts? Chelsea? Yeah, go ahead.
So we have also spoken to universities as well, and we've also recruited a lot of students that way that maybe want to do some volunteering on the side with their studies. But I think we do also do some of our, well, I say recruiting, like obviously like it's not like on purpose, but you know, if we have an in-person card making event, which we do host a few every year, sometimes we may also speak about those opportunities when we're at those events. So for example, like sometimes I host a card making event like where I live. And so I can like invite some of my friends round, and like sometimes it would be done in a cafe. So then other people would, so you know, kind of getting other small businesses involved with the advertising, but also when we're there in person, we can then also speak to the people that are making those cards for us right there and then, who are just kind of looking for a fun activity to do, but then find out that there's actually more opportunities to do things more regularly with us as well. So just kind of having that in person like touch when we're doing those events can be quite beneficial too.
A little bit of a taster for people of what volunteering could look like. I love that idea. Love that. I'm going to move on. Brilliant answers so far. A really great question I'd like to pick up on here is socials for your volunteers, and so somebody's put in the chat here. We offer a monthly volunteer social for different volunteering groups in our community to socialize and get to know each other, which is so important. But we're only just starting out with remote volunteering. Have you got any advice on how they could adapt this for remote volunteers? Does anyone do this already successfully? Anyone want to jump in? Heather, yes.
Yeah, so we do, because we have a large cohort of volunteering and it is difficult. So excuse me, we do it monthly, and our role managers open of an evening 7 till 8 once a month, and it's open to all volunteers to go and join. We sometimes have guest speakers come in. We have different people from the society. We have external speakers come in. Sometimes just 10 people will turn up, other times, depending on who the speaker is, that we get greater people come through. But it's just having that flexibility that you can come if you want to, and you can come as often as you want to. So you could do it once a year if you wanted to, but it gives a good opportunity for new volunteers to join existing volunteers on a once a month basis. We also have geographically, they meet in different areas, so that would be more in Ruth's side, but we have geographical face-to-face meetings where if you're from that area, you can go to that community from there. But that's the best way that we do it flexibly. We do it as a drop-in. We let people have, as well as just getting to know each other, have an interest to come through. We really find that if we have a good speaker come through, we put our CEO on there once, and it was we had queues trying to get in because I wanted to ask all questions, but sometimes I have me, so yeah, lower turnout for that one. But we have different people come in from different charities and things like that, so it just really does depend. And I think because it's in the evening as well, and it's set, and we kind of have a calendar of events going on and it's pre-organised and everything else, people don't feel, oh, if I can't make that one, I've lost out, I can make the next one, or go from there, really. So even if just one person turned up, it's still going to happen, and there still will be benefits from that. But that works really, really well for us to get them together.
Brilliant. Anyone want to add any other thoughts? Chelsea?
I'm assuming me and Katie will probably say similar things, but we also have meetings as well that we don't just do like fun things, but we also do them as a way to keep everyone updated on other people's roles and tasks, because a lot of us may do things that maybe nobody else does. And so then it means that we can kind of share what we're doing with each other. So then everyone's kind of in the loop as well. So they're not so far removed from everyone else that's doing something else. Like if someone's doing social media, that's very different from packaging a bravery package or making an activity pack. So just kind of keeping everyone together in that way. But we do also every year do like a Christmas thing as well. So like the last few years that I've been here, I've been the one to do the Christmas quiz, and we would just do a very fun thing for everyone to just kind of come in and not think about any of our roles actually and just focus on something really fun. But one thing that I think helps us particularly is that before we set a date for the meetings, we actually do a poll to see and then we choose a date that way by like choosing like specific options that meet like the most people that can come, and that way we can kind of guarantee as many people can attend as possible. That's one thing that I think really helps for us anyway as a small team.
Fantastic. And does anybody have any really good recommendations for the best platform that you've used, I suppose, for connecting volunteers? Has a Facebook group worked? Has a WhatsApp group worked from your experience?
So yeah, so personally we use WhatsApp. I mean, at the moment, all of our volunteers sort of have access to that. Also, if they weren't to, we'd sort of look into other options as well. But at the moment, we sort of tend to use WhatsApp as a way to sort of connect everyone, keep everyone updated, and we sort of have like a main group chat for all of our volunteers, and then sort of like sub group chats as well. Sort of like for the volunteers that handle our social media, we have like a different chat for them. And also as well, like for sort of like socialization outside of volunteering. So the volunteers can sort of socialize. We have different group chats for that as well, for things that they might just want to discuss and sort of talk about sort of outside of their volunteer role, to sort of give them that like socialization opportunity as well.
Fab.
I have to say it's not something we use. I would quite be interested to chat to Katie about the WhatsApp and how they overcome like the GDPR, etc. But I think Facebook groups used to be quite a popular thing. But I think from our point of view is you need somebody to manage that, and that's a lot to ask a staff member to be managing if something was put on at 10 o'clock at night. So I think for us being such a big charity, I think logistically would be very difficult to manage, but I appreciate for smaller charities that might be a lot more manageable. So not something we've got a huge amount of experience on.
But I suppose, like everything, you're asking people how they'd prefer to communicate, right? And what would work best for them. I'm going to move on to the next question. And I love this question because we get it on the help desk as well. Volunteering in a kind of remote world, how do you deal with expenses? So how do you deal with expenses for your remote volunteers to make sure they're not out of pocket as a result of their volunteer role, with things like the use of phone, internet, having the right software? Just from my perspective, of course, as we know, you can't pay volunteers fixed sums or rewards. And what's really tricky in this circumstance is that you've got to be able to prove that what you're paying is a genuine reimbursement of a volunteering expense. So when someone works from home or volunteers from home, it's very difficult to say which part of the heating bill or which part of the broadband bill can be attributed to volunteering. Has anybody had any creative approaches to this, or how have you dealt with this with your remote volunteers? Go for it, Ruth.
Yeah, this was something that sort of came up very much when we were going into COVID and we went, remote, especially with the companion call service. That question would be asked by some volunteers: how do I claim my mobile bill back? So we find that the majority of volunteers didn't claim or didn't want to claim because they had 3 minutes, so it was kind of included in that. But we did say that if people did want to claim, then they would have to, show an itemized bill of the length of time, and then a certain amount of money, a bit like mileage, could be paid for that. We haven't had, I personally don't know of anyone that's asked for a contribution towards their internet, because I think you're right. I think how you would manage that, and most people, if people have internet, it's usually they have it anyway, as opposed to getting it for their volunteering. I guess that might be different if it was required for the role, but we haven't had an experience of that. But we'd always look at something if it came in to see actually is there a way around it, and we do have a volunteering policy and a volunteering process for claiming expenses, and we do encourage volunteers to claim them. Things like software, if a volunteer requires it for their role, then we would ensure that they had that. And if they need full access, say to our systems, particularly for a role, then IT would obviously sort that out. So yeah, we wouldn't expect somebody to provide that themselves, if that makes sense. But not a lot of our roles would require software. It would be more your telephone-based ones. And Heather, I don't know, do you see a lot of people claim for telephone through yours, because a lot of people do have a certain amount of minutes free?
Yeah, we do have telephone bills come through, which we do exactly as you've just said there. Most people are on 3 minutes, but there are people, particularly those who make a number of calls within companion calls. So they could be calling up to 10 people a week. They do highlight their number and bring through. And over the recent years, our expenses system has improved a lot. So it's really easy for them to put their expenses on, and we make sure that's really quickly as well. But what did come to mind, Ruth, was when we're talking expenses, some people have to pay up front for expenses, and that's particularly if it's travel, and that is difficult for some people. And we have been flexible and worked together, Ruth, haven't we, recently, actually, where we've actually said, okay, we can pay up front, so you're not out of pocket to start with, because I think it is difficult, isn't it? And we have mentioned particularly with disabilities as well. Cost of living is something that people are embarrassed to talk about, so they'd like to come and volunteer with us, but they haven't got the fare to get to an office, or they haven't got the fare to get to a walk, or whatever they're volunteering to do. So we are flexible in that, in working with people to make sure that we can pay before the event, before they've had to pay out for themselves. So it is person-centred to each one, but particularly for companion calls, I'd say about 10% of our volunteers do claim for their calls, and we make it very simple for them.
That's something that can be broken down, isn't it? So you can see that this is a genuine reimbursement of a volunteering expense.
We also have a travel system, which is particularly for staff, but sort of in that situation, if somebody, maybe we were asked them to go and speak at a conference, we can book their train ticket, whatever, through that, so they don't have to pay up front. Also, and it's not very often, but if they needed to stay overnight, we can book their travel through that. And like Heather says, we have done that before, where we had somebody that was volunteering in one of our offices and actually was looking to get into employment, so obviously didn't have the money to pay for the train, so we were able to buy, that ticket up front, just to support them to be able to access the volunteering. So again, sometimes it's on a case-by-case basis, something that's, don't expect or is out of the blue, but we will always try to look for a workaround, as there usually always is one.
Thank you. I am going to have to finish up our Q&A there. Time has flown. Just a reminder to everybody, there were questions that came in that have been wonderfully answered by our panelists, and we're going to save those, and we can compile those into a document to send out. There was a great question that I've just put a typed answer to around not blurring those lines between a volunteer and employee, or even between a volunteer and a voluntary worker, and kind of using the right language as well. And I've put a few links in that answer, which should be helpful. Can we just get the final slides up, please? Thank you. Fantastic. So I won't spend too much time running through these, but loads of resources here for you, and we'll put those in the follow-up email as well. We've got lots of webinars that you can watch. We've got lots of help and guidance, and of course, our time well spent research that I mentioned earlier. Next slide. And just a link there to the research that Dega and Christine spoke about at the beginning there, the guidelines for reducing and removing barriers for disabled volunteers, as well as some other really useful resources that we've come across. And I will make sure to share any other links that our panelists spoke about today. Next slide. before you all run off, because I know we're running out of time, we are just going to get a snap poll up on the screen. Very, very grateful if you can please take 2 seconds to fill this in. If Lorena, you could get that up, please. Thank you. There are 2 questions there. Really grateful for those of you who can participate before you need to run off. It really helps us. We do take this insight seriously and use it to plan our webinars going forward. And when you end the Zoom call today, you'll get taken to a slightly longer evaluation survey. Again, very grateful if you could fill that in for us. It's so helpful. We do listen to your feedback. And I'm so glad to see all of those positive comments in the chat. I'm so pleased. I've very much enjoyed it myself and learned a lot. I hope you have too. Thank you for that great feedback. And just my final slide. This is just a QR code. If you are interested in joining NCVO, if you're not already a member, you can scan this on your screen. And I'd just like to end by saying a huge thank you for joining us today and to our amazing speakers who've given up their time to be here today and share their knowledge and insights with us. Have a wonderful festive break, everybody, when it comes, and hope to see you at our next webinar in the new year. Keep an eye on our website for more details. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.